We're going to hear today from two of my personal heroes, Robert Peck and Peter Calthorpe. Both men have worked throughout their careers in myriad ways to redefine what constitutes a successful place at every scale, from building to block to neighborhood to village, town, or city, all the way out to the scale of the region. And they did so largely by including things outside the scope of what might otherwise be considered their purview. They looked beyond the blueprint. They looked in addition to the pro forma. They looked around the transit station. They extended out into the region, always making the arguments for human-scaled, multi-use, walkable, livable, environmentally sustainable places. Their success has paved the way for the success of an entire movement. And their armies of new urbanists, smart growthers, sustainable community advocates, and of course, rail volutionaries have had a smoother, shorter path forward because of their groundbreaking work. Although they do labor in very different organizations and with different types of clients and colleagues, both men have always had an extraordinary influence beyond their specific projects, and I have to say, very deliberately so. They've tangibly broadened the constituency for transit-oriented, walkable, livable communities, and we're going to hear how this afternoon. First, from Robert Peck. I first met Bob Peck when he was the Commissioner of the Public Building Service for President Clinton in the Clinton administration. And he was an amazing guy, really taught me how to be effective within the confines of the federal government. He has recently served as the managing director of the real estate firm Jones Lang LaSalle, where he advised corporations, governments, and nonprofits on real estate portfolio strategy and how to do public-private mixed-use development. He's had a lot of federal experience, from the Office of Management and Budget to the National Endowment for the Arts, but he also worked on as a staffer to the U.S. Senate and was very particularly the chief of staff to the late and great Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He's been a land use lawyer, real estate lawyer, president locally here of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, as well as the past president of the D.C. Preservation League. He even served on the Board of Education in the city, so he's our local Renaissance man. What he does right now is what he used to do. He's once again the Commissioner of Public Buildings for GSA with an even bigger platform, a broader scope. He's responsible for the nationwide asset management, design, construction, leasing, and building management, as well as disposition for 370 million square feet of government-owned and leased space, accommodating 1 million federal workers. He's got a budget that's over $9 billion and a workforce that's greater than 7,000. And he really uses that platform, I think, to help change communities for the better wherever there are federal buildings. So if you'll join me in welcoming Bob Peck.
Okay, so I don't want to make this too much of a, you scratch your back, I'll scratch mine, but when I was at GSA the first time, I heard that there was a smart growth program going on at the Environmental Protection Agency, and it turned out, of course, Harriet was running it. I couldn't figure out how she'd managed to fit that under their purview, but she did. So she's a hero of mine, and so is Peter Calthorpe, who I've never gotten to meet before. So quite honestly, I agreed to come here not only because I believe in Volution and what it stands for, but because I'd get to meet Peter, and I've followed him from afar for a very, very long time. So let me see if I can get this to work. So GSA, we're the government's, as we said when I was in the Army, we're kind of like the ash and trash unit of the federal government. We're the landlord. We buy cars and computers for federal agencies, and my part of it is a real estate part, which sounds, I think, kind of boring to people until you realize the scale of what we do and what it's possible that we can do. GSA has a wonderful legacy of buildings. We're big, we're nationwide. I just show this because you should know if you want to work with us, and I hope I'll convince you by the end that you should. We're organized into 11 regions, but go to www.gsa.gov when this is done if you want to find out more about us. We have a pretty reasonably accessible website we're kind of proud of it. But this is the scale of what we do. We build, we design, we build, we lease, a very big deal, by the way, which people don't think about so much, all across the nation. We lease in 8,100 different buildings across the country. That is, that we are a tenant to private sector landlords. Those leases are a lot more volatile than our office building space is. We move around a good deal. Leases expire at the end of 5, 10, 15 years, and we have to decide where to go. There's some really great opportunities to think about location decisions that way. But we own 1,500 buildings that are owned by you, the citizens of the United States, built to serve federal agencies and also to serve the public and visitors. It's a lot of square footage, as Harriet noted. The owned portfolio alone is worth about $46 billion. It's kind of an old portfolio in real estate terms. The average age of our assets is about 46 years, but we also have very historic assets going back to the 1830s, and then we have some that we've built within the last year. Most important to us, though, is that we have clients, we have customers, about 100 different federal agencies, and about 1.1 million federal full-time employees who either come to our building every day for work or, as I'll note, these days more and more, don't have to come to their building to work. That's a whole other issue in real estate, which I'll touch on. This is the kind of portfolio it is. I'm proud of showing this because the building on the upper left, the Custom House in Lower Manhattan, built in about 1906, is the kind of building that the federal government built from the time of Washington and Jefferson, who really actually even wrote about architecture as being important to the image of government. Clearly in a walkable location, Lower Manhattan, the beginning of where New York City was. You couldn't help but be walkable in that era. I think only 2 years earlier, the IRT opened the first subway line in New York. On the upper right, but then we kind of fell apart. I wish I had the picture. On the upper right is what we're now doing is reskinning the Peter Odino Federal Building in Newark, New Jersey, in a pretty decent area of Newark, a little bit redeveloping. We've reskinned the building because for a long time GSA built pretty crappy buildings. We kind of turned our back on the legacy of the federal government, but we came back. The lower right is a new courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, in not the best area in Eugene, for those of you who know it, but in a developing area where the city wanted us to locate and help spur development. It's kind of industrial. And on the lower left, an overhead view of our courthouse in Seattle. Again, Seattle, Washington, located where the city felt development was moving and that we could help spark some development, and we have, although I got to admit, I think Nordstrom also moved their headquarters near there. That made a difference. I love this building not only because it's a really good building, it's got a wonderful urban park that people actually use, not just, it is in fact, and I'll talk about this too, it's part of our security standoff area, but you wouldn't know it to be there. When they do, no offense folks from Seattle, when they do finally get sun, it's really nice. And even when they don't, it's pretty nice, and there's a coffee shop in the building, and in these days, trying to get mixed use in federal building is a challenge, and I'm pretty proud of that as well. So I've mentioned it, there is a challenge to the federal government locating in walkable, livable locations these days, and it mostly has to do with security. Not only, even before September 11th, it was a federal government GSA building that was blown up in Oklahoma City with a loss of 169 people in 1995, and so we've got pretty good reason to be concerned, but things don't need to look like this. We don't need to take what you could see on the left in Manhattan, clearly a walkable, livable environment, and do everything we can to screw it up in the name of security, or to turn the mall in Washington into what it was close to becoming. There are other ways to do this. And on the left is our San Francisco Federal Building, also by Tom Main. A wonderful example of sustainability, by the way, in every sense of the word. It is in a terrific location in San Francisco. It's not air conditioned above the 5th floor because you really shouldn't air condition buildings in a climate like San Francisco, but we've, as a society, have done it. And it's got a plaza, which is not my favorite, but it does have a child care center and a restaurant, and we've done the best we can to integrate it into the community. We did a much better job of that earlier in the mid to late 1990s with the courthouse you see on the right in Boston, designed by Paycobb Freed. It's, again, in an area of Boston that was redeveloping, the Fan Pier, an area that is now, if you look around it, a lot of development around our courthouse. Boston wanted a walkable environment. There's a walkway along Boston Harbor that goes by our building. The question that we faced early on in designing this was, would we participate in that or choose not to for reasons of security? We did. There's a dock on the right. One of the tour boats for Boston ties up at our dock. Again, there's a restaurant in the building, and it's used by the community. And to me, we don't build it. We do build these buildings for the courts to carry on their business. Our buildings have to participate in their community. This is a $220-some million investment, not just in federal employees and judges for the next 100, 200 years, but in the city of Boston and its community. And we found a way to get all the security we needed in there with all of these things. It requires a lot of work. I'm making a special plea. I sound like a special pleader about security. We need your help. I'll just say this: security people are designed in kind of one mode, and they do a great job. But if you'd let them, we'd button up our buildings and nobody would get in. You know, the safest building is one that nobody actually uses, and it's a blockhouse. But I keep saying I'm the commissioner of the Public Buildings Service, not the Fortress Building Service, and that's the way we intend to run. And mostly I have support for doing that in this administration. It's pretty great. So here's, to get straight to it, here's an interesting example of transit-oriented development. And for those of you who are in Suitland this Sunday, and I know there's some critique of what the federal government did, at least I hope there is, because we made some huge mistakes. I think you'll see some different ways we can operate. What you see on the right is the Department of Transportation headquarters building. Unknown to many people, it happens to be a leased building, but on land that was owned by the federal government. We sold it to a developer, and now we're leasing the building back for a long period of time. We chose to put this entire area used to be part of the Washington Navy Yard, which was acquired by the federal government in the 1790s, and it is going to become a mixed-use development with us a part of it. So it's near a metro station. It unfortunately, to me, does not have retail uses on the ground floor of the building, but it is an anchor, and a lot has developed around it. The fact that we didn't know at the time, we'll take credit for it. The fact that the Washington Nationals decided to locate nearby and build a ballpark didn't hurt. But there is an awful lot of residential and office and retail development going on around there. And it's an example of how we were able to take a piece of our land and turn it from a single-use government piece of property to a mixed-use development sitting on a river that was just crying out for a different kind of development. And a similar development in Denver, Colorado. The federal government since World War II has had a huge campus. We have about 4 million square feet on this campus, a lot of different federal agencies occupying buildings, many of them just renovated World War II warehouses. But I'm proud to say that you'll see a plan on the right, which is our master plan. You see on the left, it's a pretty spread out World War II kind of campus. But we have a plan for much denser development, a lot of it done by selling off parcels that we don't need for federal development and also densifying what we've got there. And most important of all, the Denver light rail is coming out there, and there was a period, it's a great story of false assumptions in a way. The light rail district in Denver at some point came out and came to talk to our GSA folks. This is when I was at GSA the first time, and I had nothing to do with it. I want to tell you there are great people all over GSA, and said, all right, we've got a way to do this. We want to have a transit station pretty close to your federal center. We know you probably won't like it. You'll be worried about security and all that, so we're going to locate it a ways off, and we won't really touch you guys. And our folks in Denver said we want it absolutely as close to the federal center as you can possibly get it. We gave them an easement to allow it to come even closer to our property. We have since then sold off one parcel that's been redeveloped as a hospital. And as you can see, a lot of this plan takes advantage of the fact that this is going to be a huge TOD location on the outskirts of Denver and turn it into a real different kind of development. We're proud of it. It'll be better for the federal employees who right now all have to drive there. And it'll be a much better place for the federal employees there because they have a lot of really nice running trails there, but it'll be a nice walkable environment as well. Here's something we've done, and this is where I want to introduce someone else at GSA, just so he can stand up. We have a Center for Urban Development. It's run by Frank Giblin. Frank, stand up. All of this is his work. So we've taken a look at our assets in the National Capital Region, which is obviously it's about a third of our inventory, about 100 million square feet. And what we did was take a look at our assets, and the blue dots are government-owned buildings. The purple is our leased locations. And here's what we discovered. About 72% of the rentable square feet, so about 72 million square feet, is within a half a mile of metro. Ever since the metro system was built here, and built mostly with federal funds, back when it was called America's Metro System. So for any of you from Dallas, Fort Worth, and you think you've got America's team, we've got America's Metro. And we like our football team better anyway most of the time. But we've got 72% of our rentable square feet within a half a mile of metro, and within a quarter mile about half of it. So we really are, whether we were thinking about it or not, we did have a conscious policy that's worked out pretty well. And this is the kind of analysis that Frank and his crew have helped us do. But we do have some opportunities still. We have 26 million square feet that is not within half a mile of transit, and of that, 14 million of it is leased. And as I noted, we have a lot more, when you own a building, we don't get rid of that many buildings, although we are looking to consolidate space. We may have some buildings that we do get rid of in the next couple of years. But we do have leased space that expires. And as we do that in this region, we're going to have an opportunity to move a lot closer to metro. There are some other projects that we're looking at now in which, and we're in the middle of an interesting little dispute, which I won't go into, in which a large factor in the decision we made about where to locate a lease had to do with our requirement that it be close to a metro station. We actually are prepared, and this is tough in this fiscal environment, to make a decision to be closer to a metro station, which often means you pay more than to be somewhere farther away, in which we could get obviously a cheaper rental rate. But it's a trade-off that I don't need to tell anybody in this audience. When you're talking about greenhouse gases, commuting times, all those kinds of things, it's awfully important. We are measuring ourselves in this administration, which is very green. I always say I'm back because we're even recycling federal officials. We care about greenhouse gases not only to get LEED ratings in our buildings, but to make sure that our locations are sustainable locations as well. I happen to be one of those people who thinks the LEED ratings are a little bit light on the credit they give you for locations, and a little bit heavy on some of their other factors, which are really good, but sustainable wood and all that is great. I'm just a little disappointed when I'll see a LEED Gold or Platinum building in our region that sits about 3 miles from a metro station on top of a parking deck. It's a little... So we're having that kind of a candid exchange with Rick Fedrisi and the really good people at the Green Building Council. And then we've taken this a step further, we meaning Frank, not me, but Frank Giblin has taken this a step further. And within the district, we've done this analysis based on walkscores.com, and I think some work that StreetSense is also doing. And what you see here is the green means a walkable, livable environment, meaning that, well, I don't need to tell you. I have to tell other audiences what walkability means. All right, so it's walkable. There are amenities. So you'll even see that we get a little bit light green. A lot of our owned and leased locations around the National Mall don't get quite the same score that they might get in other locations in the Washington area, because the mall, wonderful as it is, is a little light on amenities sometimes. But anyway, you can see that we're pretty well, with all of that said, we're pretty well located in the Washington area, and we're doing these kinds of analyses for our buildings across the country and talking to our clients, the federal agencies, when they come to us for locations about this stuff. Two other things I'm going to note really quickly. One is on September 16th, the Council on Environmental Quality issued new guidelines on transit-oriented development. 2 years ago in October, President Obama issued Executive Order 13514. You don't need to memorize a lot of federal gobbledygook, but 13514, if you want to memorize some, would be really good. It's a memo requiring the federal government to be more sustainable, more green. And one little noted provision in there, and in the midst of telling all of us to measure our greenhouse gases when we travel or hold conferences or buy things, was this thing requiring federal agencies to be located in TOD locations. We've issued guidance. You can read it yourself. It encourages us not to be in green fields, by which we mean obviously agricultural and public open space, but it does encourage us to look at walkable, bikeable sites, take a look at our location efficiencies, being near transit, obviously. And this is great for us because we do talk to some of our customer agencies who, when we say, you know, we really think this is a good thing to do, to be near transit, they say, well, GSA, that's your view, not necessarily ours. And we can now say, no, it's the federal government's view, which you're a part of too. So this is a great new tool for us. We worked in concert with DOT, the Environmental Protection Agency, and HUD, and the Department of Defense on this. So it's a wonderful new thing. Finally, this is something I think to take a look at, and it's something that all of us who deal with real estate and transportation need to look at. Here's what this chart says. If you don't have to take anything else from it. On any given day in most office locations, at least white-collar office settings, about a third of the people don't report to work at all, and we think the number may be even higher. In this day and age, in every day and age, it was probably true to some extent because people are on travel, they're on vacation, they're homesick. You get a call from school, as I occasionally do, saying, we'd like to talk to you about your kids, and you're off. But even with those in the building at any given time, a third of people who are assigned a desk are not sitting at their desk. This is an interesting thing. Go back to my whole thing about how much real estate are we going to use these days. These are GSA, federal government workplace settings. It's not just Silicon Valley that's adopting this kind of an approach. You can get a lot more people, a lot less space, or a lot of people who work from home or who take their laptop, iPad, BlackBerry, whatever, and go work wherever their customer is. This is going to change the way we do real estate. Finally, just as and it still doesn't mean that our locations won't want to be near transit. Just locations may be very different. In our own GSA headquarters building, built in 1917, and by the way, I always note the day it was opened, an incredibly green building because the windows opened. Didn't have air conditioning. They didn't have any choice. They actually had to face the southern side of the building has the least window surface, something which architects somehow managed to forget once they could hermetically seal a building. In any event, we're going to reopen the windows. We're going to put on a green roof, all that kind of great stuff. And finally, we're only about a 7-minute walk from the metro stations, and fighting all of the security experts we could find, we decided not to put bollards around the building, and instead we're putting ground floor retail on the south side of the building in an area of town that's pretty dead. Between us and the World Bank, we've in fact, we're renting the public space from the District of Columbia, thank you, and we are, though you should see those things start popping out any day. In any event, those are, all I'm telling you partly is you have a potential partner here in the federal government. You should take a look, if you're not from Washington, or even if you are, take a look at federal buildings around, see where you see opportunities, talk to us about them. We have done a lot over the last 15, 20 years to make sure that we do work in a TOD sense, and we want to do more. And thanks, and I want to hear Peter.